Marcus Chen had been hauling refrigerated cargo for 12 years across the Pacific Northwest, and he prided himself on never refusing a load. In October 2019, a last-minute job came through his dispatcher, a rush delivery of medical supplies from a pharmaceutical warehouse in Portland to a research facility in Spokane. The pay was triple his usual rate, and the client insisted on a night departure. Marcus arrived at the warehouse at 11 p.m., where two men in unmarked uniforms loaded 40 sealed cardboard boxes into his trailer without speaking a word. The first hour of the drive along I-84 was unremarkable. Marcus kept his CB radio on, chatting occasionally with other drivers about road conditions and truck stop coffee. But as he climbed into the Cascade Range, he noticed a smell, faint at first, like copper pennies mixed with something organic and rotting. He checked his refrigeration unit. It was functioning perfectly at 38 degrees. The smell intensified as he drove, becoming so overwhelming that he had to crack his window despite the freezing October wind. Around 2 a.m., somewhere between Hood River and the Dalles, Marcus pulled onto a scenic overlook to investigate. He walked to the back of his trailer, his breath forming clouds in the mountain air, and opened the doors. The interior light revealed something that made his stomach drop. Dark red liquid was seeping from the bottom of every single box, pooling on the trailer floor and dripping onto the pavement. It looked exactly like blood, thick, viscous, and still warm enough to steam in the cold air. Marcus grabbed his phone to call his dispatcher, but he had no signal. The boxes weren't labeled with any identifying information, just numerical codes that meant nothing to him. He climbed into the trailer despite every instinct screaming at him to run. The liquid was definitely blood. He could see it clearly now, soaking through the cardboard, spreading across the floor in dark patterns that seemed almost deliberate. He touched one box, and it was warm, pulsing slightly as if something inside was breathing. Panicking, Marcus ran back to his cab and drove, abandoning any thought of inspecting the cargo further. But the smell grew worse, filling the entire cab with a nauseating copper stench that made him gag. His radio began picking up strange interference, whispers in languages he didn't recognize, and underneath them, what sounded like crying. He turned the radio off, but the sounds continued, now coming from the sleeper berth behind him, from the vents, from everywhere. At a truck stop near Biggs Junction, Marcus tried to get help, but when he brought the night manager to his trailer, the boxes were dry. No blood, no smell, nothing but ordinary cardboard containers sitting neatly on a clean floor. The manager looked at Marcus like he was insane. Humiliated and confused, Marcus got back on the road, convincing himself he'd hallucinated from exhaustion. The delivery address in Spokane led him to an abandoned industrial park. No research facility, no building numbers, just empty warehouses with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. Marcus sat in his truck for 20 minutes, trying to call his dispatcher, but every call went straight to a disconnected number. When he finally opened his trailer again, the boxes were gone, completely gone. The trailer was empty except for dark stains on the floor that looked like rust but smelled like blood. Marcus drove his empty trailer back to Portland in a daze. When he arrived at his company's yard, his dispatcher claimed they'd never sent him any medical supply job. There was no record of the delivery in their system, no payment authorization, nothing. The men who loaded his truck didn't exist in any security footage from the warehouse. But Marcus's bank account showed a deposit of $7,000 from an account that belonged to a company that had been dissolved in 1987. He sold his truck 3 weeks later and took a job at a warehouse, refusing to ever drive long haul again. But sometimes, late at night, he still smells copper in his apartment. He finds dark stains on his clothes that he can't wash out. And once, When he was cleaning his closet, he discovered a small cardboard box he'd never seen before, identical to the ones from that night, sitting in the corner. It was warm to the touch and sealed with tape that looked wet and red. Marcus burned the box in his fireplace without opening it. The smoke that rose from it was black and thick, and for just a moment, he heard screaming coming from the flames. He moved to a different apartment the next day, but he knows the boxes will find him again eventually. Some cargo doesn't care about delivery addresses. Some cargo chooses its own Sarah Donovan had been driving for Werner Enterprises for 8 years, specializing in cross-country furniture hauls. In March 2021, she picked up a load of antique furniture from an estate sale warehouse in Savannah, Georgia, bound for a collector in Sacramento. The manifest listed Victorian-era pieces, chairs, tables, a grandfather clock, and one particularly ornate mirror with a gilt frame that required special handling. Sarah loaded everything carefully, securing each piece with padding and straps. She left Savannah at dawn, planning to make it to Birmingham by nightfall. The first strange thing happened on I-16, about 2 hours into her drive. Sarah glanced at her passenger side mirror and saw a woman sitting in her passenger seat. She was wearing a dark dress that looked old-fashioned, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her face was pale, almost luminous in the morning light, and she was staring straight ahead without blinking. Sarah slammed on her brakes, her heart hammering. The truck shuddered to a stop on the shoulder, and she looked at the passenger seat. Empty. Completely empty. She checked the sleeper berth, looked under the seat, even opened the passenger door to see if someone was crouching outside. Nothing. She convinced herself it was a reflection, maybe from the furniture in the back creating strange optical effects. But the woman appeared again an hour later. This time, Sarah was fully alert, both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. The woman simply materialized in the passenger seat, wearing the same dark dress, her hands folded in her lap. Sarah could see her clearly, not a reflection, not a shadow, but a solid presence sitting 3 feet away. The woman's lips moved as if she was speaking, but no sound came out. Sarah pulled into a rest area outside Macon, her hands shaking so badly she could barely shift into park. She grabbed her phone and called her husband, but before she could explain what was happening, she saw the woman standing outside her truck, about 20 feet away, next to the trailer. The woman was pointing at the back of the trailer, her mouth still moving soundlessly, her expression urgent and distressed. Against every instinct, Sarah walked to the trailer and opened it. The furniture inside had shifted despite her careful securing. The antique mirror had fallen and cracked, and in the broken glass, Sarah saw dozens of reflections of the woman, not just one, but multiple versions, all wearing different expressions of terror and anguish. Some were screaming silently, others reaching toward her with desperate hands. Sarah slammed the trailer shut and called her dispatcher, demanding to know the origin of the furniture. After 20 minutes of increasingly frantic calls, she learned the truth. The furniture came from the Blackwood house in Savannah, site of a notorious murder in 1893. Rebecca Blackwood had been killed by her husband in front of her mirror while getting dressed for church. 7 other women had died in that house over the decades. Fires, falls, mysterious illnesses. The mirror had witnessed all of them. The collector in Sacramento specialized in haunted objects. He paid premium prices for items with violent histories. Sarah's company had transported 3 previous loads from estate sales without telling their drivers what they were hauling. One driver had quit after experiencing what he described as shadow hands, trying to grab the wheel. Another had driven her truck off a bridge in Nevada, She survived but claimed a woman in a dark dress had suddenly appeared in front of her windshield. Sarah refused to continue the delivery. She parked the truck at a terminal in Atlanta and walked away. The company threatened legal action, but after the mirror was finally delivered by another driver, they changed their policy. The second driver had arrived in Sacramento, completely unresponsive, staring straight ahead, muttering about a woman who wouldn't stop screaming in her ear. Sarah never drove commercially again, but the woman followed her home. For 3 months, Sarah saw her in reflections in windows in her bathroom mirror, in the screen of her television. Always wearing the dark dress, always with that desperate expression, always pointing at something Sarah couldn't see. Sarah consulted a medium who explained that Rebecca Blackwood was trying to warn her about the other spirits attached to the mirror, malevolent entities that fed on fear. The medium performed a cleansing ritual, and the appearances stopped, but Sarah keeps every mirror in her house covered with cloth now. She never looks at her reflection longer than necessary. And sometimes, when she's alone in a quiet room, she hears the faint rustling of taffeta fabric and sees from the corner of her eye a dark shape moving just beyond her peripheral vision, still trying to deliver its warning. Story 3. Tiechkadia Itisaf. Daniel Pritchard was a third-generation trucker from Kentucky who drove for a small independent operation hauling agricultural equipment throughout the Midwest. In August 2018, he accepted a job transporting a vintage 1940s-era harvester from a farm equipment museum in Des Moines to a private collector in Oklahoma City. The harvester was a massive piece of machinery, rusted and weathered, with stories attached about accidents involving 3 different farmhands who died operating it in the 1950s. The first night, Daniel stopped at a truck stop outside Kansas City around midnight. He did his usual inspection, checked his logbook, and climbed into his sleeper berth. He was asleep within minutes, exhausted from 10 hours of driving. But at 30:17 a.m., he woke to the sensation of movement. His truck was rolling forward. The engine was running. Daniel scrambled into the driver's seat to discover his truck moving steadily down the highway at exactly 55 miles per hour. The steering wheel was turning on its own, making smooth corrections as the truck navigated curves. His foot wasn't on the accelerator. His hands weren't on the wheel. The GPS showed he'd already traveled 38 miles from the truck stop, meaning his truck had driven itself for nearly 40 minutes while he slept. Terrified, Daniel grabbed the wheel and tried to take control, but it resisted him, fighting back with surprising force. He hit the brakes and they didn't respond. He tried to shift into neutral, but the transmission was locked. The radio turned itself on, filling the cab with static, and underneath the static, the sound of farming equipment, tractors, threshers, the rhythmic clang of machinery, and voices, men screaming in pain. The truck continued driving itself south on Highway 69, maintaining perfect speed and lane discipline. Daniel tried opening his door to jump out, but the locks engaged automatically. He was trapped inside his own vehicle, watching helplessly as it drove through the dark Kansas countryside. Every few minutes, the steering wheel would turn slightly, and Daniel realized the truck was navigating turns he hadn't reached yet. It knew the route better than he did. At a rest area near Fort Scott, the truck suddenly pulled off the highway and parked itself smoothly in a truck space. The engine shut off. The silence was deafening. Daniel sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Then he heard footsteps on gravel outside, heavy work boots, multiple people walking around his trailer. He looked in his mirrors but saw nothing. The footsteps continued for 5 minutes, accompanied by the sound of tools, metal scraping against metal, men talking in low voices about equipment maintenance. When the sounds finally stopped, Daniel forced himself to get out and inspect the trailer. The vintage harvester had moved. Despite being chained and strapped securely, it had shifted 3 feet to the left, and its blades, which had been rusted shut for decades, were now extended and positioned as if ready to harvest a field. Fresh oil dripped from its engine, even though it hadn't run in 60 years. And on the driver's seat of the harvester, someone had placed a pair of work gloves, stained with what looked like old blood. Daniel called the collector in Oklahoma City and explained he was abandoning the load. The collector laughed, not surprised, but amused. He told Daniel this was the harvester's 4th attempted delivery. 3 previous truckers had refused to complete the route after experiencing similar phenomena. One driver claimed the harvester had started itself in the back of his trailer, its blades spinning, cutting through the trailer walls. Another said his truck had driven him to a cornfield in the middle of nowhere and parked, then wouldn't start again until he unhooked the trailer. The harvester, the collector explained, had killed 3 men named Thomas in 3 separate accidents between 1953 and 1958. Each man had been pulled into the blades during harvest season. Their bodies had been found hours later, partially processed by the machinery. The equipment had been retired after the 3rd death, but workers at the farm reported it would start itself at night, driving through fields with no one at the wheel. Daniel drove away from the rest area, leaving the trailer behind. His company fired him for abandoning cargo, but he didn't care. For 3 weeks after, his truck would start itself randomly in his driveway, at gas stations, once while he was standing next to it with the keys in his pocket. The engine would roar to life, the wheel would turn, as if inviting him to get in and continue the delivery. He sold the truck to a scrap dealer and bought a sedan. But sometimes, late at night, Daniel hears the sound of diesel engines starting outside his bedroom window. He looks out to see nothing but empty street. And once, he found a pair of blood-stained work gloves on his doorstep, identical to the ones from the harvester's seat. He burned them immediately, but they reappeared the next morning, placed carefully on his car's dashboard. The harvester still wants its delivery completed, and it knows where Daniel lives. Jennifer Kowalski drove refrigerated trucks for Schneider National, specializing in frozen food distribution across the northeastern United States. In January 2020, she received an unusual assignment: transport a commercial freezer unit from a closed restaurant in Albany, New York, to a food service company in Buffalo. The freezer was a massive walk-in unit that had been dismantled and loaded onto her trailer in sections, along with its contents, which the manifest vaguely listed as frozen inventory. The problem started before Jennifer even left Albany. As workers loaded the freezer components, one of them, a young guy named Paul, suddenly stopped working and stood motionless near the trailer, staring at nothing. When his supervisor shouted at him, Paul turned slowly and said, "They want to know why we're moving them." He couldn't explain who they were or why he'd said it. He left the loading dock and never came back to work. Jennifer dismissed it as workplace drama and started driving. The route to Buffalo was straightforward, I-90 West, about 3 hours in good conditions. But as soon as she merged onto the highway, her refrigeration unit malfunctioned. The temperature display showed wildly fluctuating readings, dropping to -40, then jumping to +60, then back down again. The unit was making sounds it shouldn't, grinding and clicking in patterns that almost sounded like Morse code. About an hour into the drive, Jennifer heard tapping from inside her trailer. Rhythmic, persistent tapping, like someone knocking from the inside. She pulled over immediately, her breath visible in the cold January air, and opened the trailer. The freezer components were secured properly, but the temperature inside the trailer was impossibly cold, much colder than her unit could produce. Frost had formed on every surface, and her flashlight beam caught something that made her blood freeze. Names. Dozens of names scratched into the frost on the trailer walls, appearing even as she watched, written by invisible fingers. She recognized one name immediately, Paul Desjardins, the worker who'd left the loading dock, except he'd spelled his last name wrong on all his paperwork. The name on the frost was spelled correctly, the French way he'd told her his grandfather used. Jennifer ran back to her cab and drove without stopping, her hands numb on the wheel. The tapping continued, growing more frantic as she approached Buffalo. It was joined by whispers that came through her CB radio, even when it was turned off, voices speaking over each other, saying names, asking questions. Where is Michael? Have you seen Susan? Tell them we're cold. Jennifer turned her radio to every channel, but the voices remained, constant and pleading. She called her dispatcher and demanded information about the restaurant. After 30 minutes of research, the truth emerged. The restaurant, called the Winter House, had closed suddenly in November 2019 after a carbon monoxide leak killed 6 people, 4 staff members and 2 customers who'd been in the kitchen during a private event. Their bodies had been found in and around the walk-in freezer where they'd collapsed trying to escape the odorless gas. But there was more. The freezer had a history. Between 1987 and 2019, 9 people had died in or near it, heart attacks, falls, 1 suspicious suicide. A line cook had locked himself inside and frozen to death in 2003. A manager had been found dead of unknown causes slumped against the freezer door in 1995. The building itself had been a boarding house in the 1950s, where 3 people had frozen to death during a harsh winter when the heating failed. Jennifer refused to complete the delivery. She parked her truck at a service plaza and called the police, insisting they inspect the freezer contents. What they found made national news. Inside the frozen inventory were items that had never been on any manifest, personal effects belonging to the carbon monoxide victims, items their families had never recovered. Wallets, jewelry, a child's toy that had belonged to one of the customers, and meat. Packages of frozen meat that DNA testing couldn't identify, with cellular structures that matched no known animal. The food service company in Buffalo denied ordering the freezer. The original transaction had been arranged through email by someone who didn't exist, paid for with a corporate card from an account that had been closed in 1999. The restaurant owners claimed they'd sold the freezer to a demolition company, but no such company existed at the address provided. Jennifer took 3 months off work and underwent therapy for PTSD. She never hauled refrigerated cargo again, switching to dry goods exclusively, but she still hears the whispers sometimes, especially on cold nights. Names being spoken in desperate voices, asking to be remembered, asking to be found. She keeps a list of the names she heard that night, 37 in total, and researches them obsessively, finding obituaries, missing person reports, unsolved deaths. 6 months after the incident, Jennifer received a package at her home with no return address. Inside was a frozen piece of meat, still cold despite having no ice pack, wrapped in butcher paper. Written on the paper in frost was her full name, including her middle name that she never used, spelled correctly in handwriting she didn't recognize. She burned the package immediately, but the next morning found the same piece of meat in her freezer. In a home she'd locked securely, the freezer still knows where she is, and it still has inventory that needs to be delivered. Thomas Brennan had driven for J.B. Hunt for 15 years, completing thousands of deliveries across all 48 contiguous states. He prided himself on his navigation skills and his ability to find any address, no matter how remote. In September 2017, he accepted a straightforward job: deliver industrial supplies from Denver to a mining operation outside Leadville, Colorado. The GPS coordinates placed the mine in the mountains west of town, accessible by a private road off Highway 24. Thomas left Denver at 4 p.m., planning to reach Leadville by 8 p.m. and complete the delivery the next morning. The drive through the Rockies was beautiful: autumn colors painting the mountains, clear skies, light traffic. He turned off Highway 24 at the specified coordinates onto a 2-lane road that his GPS identified as County Road 7. The road was paved and well maintained, marked with regular mile markers and road signs. After 20 minutes on County Road 7, Thomas noticed something odd. The mile markers were counting backward. He'd passed marker 47, then 46, then 45, but he was driving forward. He checked his GPS. It showed him progressing normally toward his destination, still 12 miles away, but the road signs contradicted it. When he passed mile marker 38 for the third time, Thomas stopped and pulled out a paper map. County Road 7 didn't exist on any map. The area where he was driving should have been national forest with no roads at all. Thomas tried to turn around, but the road behind him had changed. Where he'd just driven, there was now only forest, dense pine trees growing across the pavement, as if the road had never existed. He drove forward, having no other choice, watching his GPS and the mile markers contradict each other with increasing absurdity. The sun set, and the road continued. Thomas passed the same gas station 3 times, a small building with 2 pumps and a flickering Texaco sign. Each time he passed it, the station looked more decrepit, more abandoned. The first time, lights were on inside. The second time, the windows were dark. The third time, the building was obviously abandoned, windows broken, weeds growing through the parking lot. But his GPS insisted he was making progress, approaching his destination. At 11 p.m., after 5 hours on a road that should have taken 40 minutes, Thomas saw headlights behind him, another truck, following about a quarter-mile back. Relief flooded through him. He grabbed his CB radio and called out, asking if the other driver knew where they were. The response came immediately, a man's voice, calm and confused. "I've been following you for an hour, buddy. Every time I try to pass, the road curves and you're still ahead of me. Where the hell are we?" They decided to stop and talk. Thomas pulled over, and the other truck, a Peterbilt hauling lumber, stopped behind him. But when Thomas got out of his cab, the other truck was gone, vanished. His CB radio crackled. "Why did you drive away? I'm still following you." Thomas looked at the empty road behind him and ran back to his cab. The road became stranger. Trees grew at impossible angles, leaning toward the road as if reaching for his truck. The pavement developed patterns, symbols and shapes that looked deliberate, like markings on a runway. His headlights caught animals watching from the forest, but they were wrong somehow, their proportions off, their eyes reflecting colors that animal eyes shouldn't reflect. At mile marker 13, Thomas found another truck parked on the shoulder, a swift transport semi that looked like it had been there for years. Rust covered the trailer, vegetation grew through the wheel wells, the windows were clouded with grime. Thomas stopped and approached cautiously. Inside the cab, he found a log book. The last entry was dated August 15, 1983. The driver, named Robert Hastings, had written, "Road won't let me leave. Passed the same church 7 times. Running out of fuel. If anyone finds this, don't follow County Road 7. Thomas's fuel gauge showed half a tank, but it had been half a tank for 2 hours, not moving, not declining despite continuous driving. His odometer had stopped at 247, 531 miles. His clock was stuck at 11:47 p.m. The road stretched ahead endlessly, perfectly straight now, with no curves, no intersections, just infinite pavement under his headlights. At what his watch said was 3 a.m., though his truck's clock still read 11:47, Thomas saw lights ahead. Not headlights, but building lights, civilization. He accelerated, desperate, and found himself entering a town. A small mountain town with a main street, shops, a hotel, all lit up and seemingly occupied. The sign said, "Welcome to Ashwood, Colorado, elevation 9, 80-40 feet." Thomas stopped at what looked like a 24-hour diner, but when he tried to enter, the door wouldn't open. He looked through the window and saw people inside, sitting at tables, eating, talking, moving, but in complete silence. He knocked on the glass, and every person inside turned to look at him simultaneously. Their faces were expressionless, their eyes empty. They stood up in unison and walked toward the door. Thomas ran back to his truck and drove through Ashwood without stopping. In his mirrors, he saw the people emerge from buildings, dozens of them, hundreds, standing in the street, watching him leave. The town ended abruptly, and he was back on County Road 7, alone in the darkness. At dawn, the road simply ended. Not at an intersection or a barrier, but ended. The pavement stopped mid-stretch, turning into normal dirt and grass, as if the road had only ever existed in Thomas's experience. His GPS showed he was 50 feet from his delivery coordinates. In front of him was a gate marked Rocky Mountain Mining Company, and beyond it, normal mountain terrain, other vehicles, workers beginning their day shift. Thomas completed his delivery in a daze. The foreman signed his paperwork and asked if he'd had trouble finding the place. Thomas asked how to get back to Highway 24. The foreman looked confused. "You're on the 24 right now. The main highway is literally right there." And it was. Highway 24 was visible just beyond the mine entrance, with regular traffic passing. Thomas drove straight home and requested to never work in Colorado again. But County Road 7 isn't finished with him. Once a month, usually near midnight, his GPS will suddenly reroute him to coordinates that don't exist, trying to guide him back to that road. He's found maps of Colorado in his truck that show County Road 7 clearly marked, even though he never purchased those maps. And sometimes, when he's driving alone at night on any highway, his mile markers start counting backward. And he knows the road is calling him back, still trying to complete that delivery from 1983, still collecting drivers who make the mistake of following their GPS into places that exist between the map and reality. To East or Phase 6. Th Voice Omenchi CB trucker Raymond Tucker was a Vietnam veteran who turned to trucking in the late 1970s, finding solace in the solitude of the road. By 2016, at age 68, he was still driving independently, hauling general freight across the southeastern United States. In November of that year, he picked up a load of textiles from a warehouse in Charlotte, North Carolina, bound for Atlanta. It was a routine run he'd done hundreds of times. 5 hours on I-85, nothing complicated. Raymond left Charlotte at 6 p.m., planning to arrive in Atlanta by 11. The weather was clear, traffic light, everything normal. He had his CB radio tuned to channel 19, listening to the usual driver chatter, reports about traffic, weather warnings, jokes and complaints. About an hour south of Charlotte, near Gaffney, South Carolina, a new voice cut through the conversation. "Breaker, breaker. This is your father. I need you to take the next exit." Raymond's blood went cold. The voice was unmistakable, his father's voice, with that distinctive gravelly tone and Kentucky accent. But his father had been dead for 33 years, killed in a truck accident in 1983. Raymond grabbed his CB handset with shaking hands. "Who is this?" "This isn't funny." The voice came back immediately, calm and patient. "Raymond Joseph Tucker, born March 17, 1948. This is your father, William Tucker. Take exit 92. There's something you need to see." No one on the CB knew his full name or birthday. Raymond hadn't used his real name on the radio in years. He went by his handle, Lucky. he looked at the upcoming signs. Exit 92 was 2 miles ahead, leading to a rural route. Every logical part of his brain screamed this was a prank, someone who'd researched him. But the voice was perfect, exactly as he remembered, including the slight whistle on sibilant sounds from his father's broken front tooth. Against his better judgment, Raymond took exit 92. The voice guided him. Turn left on County Road 18. Drive 3.2 miles. You'll understand when you get there. Raymond followed the directions, his heart pounding. The road led through farmland and forest, poorly lit, no other vehicles. His CB continued crackling with his father's voice, now telling stories from Raymond's childhood, specific memories no one else could know. After exactly 3.2 miles, Raymond's headlights illuminated a scene that shouldn't exist. On the side of the road was a truck, a 1970s era Kenworth, the exact make and model his father had driven. It was positioned at an angle, front end crumpled against a tree, just as his father's truck had looked in the accident photos. But this was impossible. His father's accident had happened in Kentucky, 500 miles away, and the truck had been scrapped decades ago. Raymond stopped and got out, his legs barely supporting him. The truck was real, solid, physical, three-dimensional. Paint peeling, rust blooming across the panels, but unmistakably his father's truck, including the dent on the driver's door from where Raymond had hit it with a baseball as a kid. The CB radio in his truck continued. "I need you to look in the cab, son. Look carefully." Raymond approached the wrecked truck and shined his flashlight through the broken window. The driver's seat was empty, but on the passenger seat was a metal lunchbox, his father's lunchbox, with W. Tucker painted on the side in his mother's handwriting. Next to it was a thermos and a road atlas open to a page showing Kentucky routes. And there was blood, dried blood on the steering wheel, the dashboard, the seat. "I didn't fall asleep," his father's voice said through the CB. "That's what the report said, but it's not true. Someone ran me off the road. A black Dodge pickup, no plates. He did it on purpose, Raymond. He was waiting for me." Raymond had spent 33 years believing his father's death was an accident caused by fatigue. The official report said William had fallen asleep at the wheel after 18 hours of driving. No other vehicles were involved, but now his father's voice was describing details that didn't match the report. A pickup truck, deliberate impact, a chase along dark country roads. "Open the lunchbox," the voice instructed. Inside the lunchbox, Raymond found items that hadn't been mentioned in any accident report. A notebook filled with his father's handwriting, documenting strange deliveries, cargo he'd been asked to transport, with no bills of lading. Pickups from warehouses that didn't exist on any map, people who'd threatened him when he asked questions. The last entry, dated the day of the accident, read, "They know I know. Black Dodge followed me from Nashville. If anything happens, tell Raymond to check the warehouse on Greer Road. Tell him I'm sorry." Raymond photographed every page with his phone, then heard his father's voice again. "You need to leave now. They're coming. The same people. They know you're here." Headlights appeared in Raymond's rearview mirror, a black Dodge pickup approaching slowly. Raymond ran to his truck and drove away, but the pickup followed. His CB radio erupted with multiple voices now, not just his father's, all talking over each other, warning him, giving him directions to evade the pursuit. The chase lasted 20 minutes, the pickup matching his every turn, until Raymond made it back to I-85 and the safety of other vehicles. The pickup disappeared. Raymond spent months investigating his father's death. The warehouse on Greer Road in Kentucky had burned down in 1985, destroying all records. But he found other drivers, retired men who'd worked the same routes in the 1970s and 80s, who told stories about a trafficking operation using legitimate trucking companies as cover. Drugs, weapons, other cargo no one talked about. Drivers who asked questions or refused loads often had accidents. At least 7 drivers died under suspicious circumstances between 1979 and 1985, all ruled accidents, all driving the same routes his father had driven. Raymond never discovered who was in the black pickup or who orchestrated his father's death, but the CB radio communications continued. Once or twice a month, always when he was alone on dark roads, his father's voice would come through the radio, giving him warnings, helping him avoid trouble, once directing him to take a different route that kept him from driving into a major pileup. Other deceased drivers began communicating too. A woman named Janet, who died in 1991, warned him about a truck stop with carbon monoxide leaks. A man called Smokey Joe, who died in 2002, told him about corrupt Dowd officers shaking down independent drivers. The radio became a lifeline to something beyond death, a network of truckers still watching over their own. Raymond retired from trucking in 2019 at age 71, but he kept his CB radio. It sits in his living room, always on, always tuned to channel 19. Most of the time it's just normal chatter, living drivers talking about road conditions. But sometimes late at night, his father's voice comes through clearly. "Hey son, just checking in. Proud of you. Drive safe." And Raymond responds, talking to his radio like it's a phone call from heaven. Knowing that somewhere in the static between frequencies, the dead still ride the highways, still protecting the living, still completing deliveries that death couldn't stop. Catherine Moss had been driving for FedEx for 9 years, handling overnight package deliveries throughout the Southwest. She was known for her reliability and her willingness to take difficult routes, remote ranches, mountain cabins, desert compounds accessible only by dirt roads. In July 2019, she received an unusual assignment to deliver a single package to an address in rural New Mexico, outside the tiny town of Magdalena, with explicit instructions to deliver between midnight and 3 a.m. The package was small, about the size of a shoebox, surprisingly heavy, and sealed with excessive amounts of packing tape, and wax seals stamped with symbols Catherine didn't recognize. The sender was listed only as Estate Services, with an address in Santa Fe that Catherine later discovered didn't exist. The recipient's name was simply Caretaker. The delivery instructions included GPS coordinates and a note in red ink. Do not arrive before midnight. Do not arrive after 3 a.m. Leave package on porch. Do not knock. Do not wait for signature. Catherine left Albuquerque at 10 p.m., giving herself plenty of time to navigate the backcountry roads. The route took her through increasingly desolate terrain, past Magdalena, through ranching country, then onto unnamed dirt roads that her GPS barely recognized. The coordinates led her to a location at least 30 miles from the nearest town, deep in the mountains. She arrived at 12:47 a.m. and immediately knew something was wrong. The house, a 2-story Victorian structure completely out of place in the New Mexico desert, was on fire. Not the smoking remains of a fire, but actively burning, flames visible through every window, smoke pouring from the roof. The kind of fire that should have fully consumed a wooden building in hours but somehow hadn't. The strangest part, the fire was completely silent. No crackling, no roaring, just eerie, quiet flames. Catherine stopped her van 30 yards from the house, unsure what to do. Her first instinct was to call 911, but she had no cell signal. The house continued burning soundlessly, flames dancing in patterns that didn't follow normal physics, sometimes flowing upward, sometimes sideways, sometimes seeming to freeze in place before moving again. As she sat debating her next move, a figure emerged from the front door. A man, walking calmly through the flames without burning, without apparent discomfort. He was dressed in what looked like early 1900s clothing, a dark suit, vest, pocket watch chain visible. He walked down the porch steps and stood in the yard, looking directly at Catherine's van, waiting. Catherine's training said to return the package to the depot, report the situation, let someone else handle it. But the delivery instructions had been so specific, and the man was clearly waiting for the package. Against every instinct, Catherine got out of her van, the package in her hands, and approached. Up close, she could see the man wasn't quite solid. Not transparent exactly, but not entirely physical either. He had depth and substance, but the flames from the house behind him were visible through his torso. He spoke, and his voice was clear despite having no obvious source. "You're punctual. That's rare these days. Most drivers arrive too early or too late." Catherine held out the package. The man took it, and she felt brief contact with his hands. They were ice cold, so cold it burned. He opened the package carefully, revealing a small wooden box carved with intricate designs. Inside the box was a photograph, black and white old, showing the same house behind them, but intact and beautiful, with a family posed on the porch. A man, woman, and 3 children. "My family," the man said quietly, "died in the fire. March 14th, 1917. I was away on business in Santa Fe. I came home to find them gone, the house burning. I went inside to try to save them. Never came out." He looked at the burning house, which continued its impossible consumption. "This fire has been burning for 102 years. I've been trying to find them for 102 years. This photograph is the only one that survived. Someone found it in a bank safety deposit box." Catherine didn't know what to say. The man carefully placed the photograph in his vest pocket and looked at her with profound sadness. "Thank you for bringing this at the right time. Before midnight, I'm not here. After 3 a.m., I can't manifest strongly enough to receive anything. You followed the instructions perfectly." He walked back toward the house, and Catherine found her voice wet. "What happens now?" The man paused at the porch steps. "Now I can show them who they were. The children don't remember. The fire took their memories, their identities. But this photograph has all our names written on the back. Once I show them, once they remember, the fire can stop. We can leave." He looked at the burning structure. Some deliveries take a century to arrive. Some debts take that long to pay. He walked into the flames and disappeared. Catherine stood frozen, watching the house. For several minutes, nothing changed. The same silent burning, the same impossible fire. Then, gradually, the flames began to subside. Not extinguishing, but fading, becoming transparent, becoming memory. Through the thinning fire, Catherine saw figures inside, 5 people, holding hands, becoming less substantial, less present. The man looked out through a window one last time, raised his hand in farewell, and then all 5 figures dissolved into light. The fire vanished completely, leaving no smoke, no heat, no burned remains. The house stood intact, old and weathered but solid, as if fire had never touched it. The porch where Catherine stood was sturdy, painted white, with a swing and potted plants. The house was no longer burning, and somehow, it never had been. Catherine ran back to her van and left without looking back. At the depot the next morning, she filed her report, delivery completed, signature not required. Her supervisor asked about the unusual timing and remote location. Catherine said the customer was elderly and had mobility issues that made nighttime delivery easier. She didn't mention the fire or the ghost or the 100-year-old debt that had finally been paid. But FedEx kept sending her similar deliveries, always packages with vague senders, always to remote coordinates, always with specific time windows. She delivered to a woman who'd been waiting 40 years for a letter from her deceased son, explaining why he'd never come home from Vietnam. She delivered to an empty field where a man accepted a package containing his wedding ring, lost in 1965 when his crop dusting plane crashed. Each recipient was dead, each delivery was decades or centuries overdue, and each time Catherine completed the delivery, some piece of unfinished business reached resolution. She quit FedEx in 2021, unable to handle the psychological weight of being a courier between the living and the dead. But packages still arrive at her home, left on her doorstep by unknown hands, with addresses written in handwriting styles from decades past, asking her to please deliver to coordinates that often don't exist on modern maps. She tries to refuse, but the packages reappear, persistent and patient. The dead have always needed mail service, and apparently, Catherine Moss has been drafted into a postal route that operates outside time, outside death, delivering final messages, forgotten items, and overdue parcels to people who've been waiting far longer than any reasonable delivery estimate. THEK Stope Teat Movididi. Greg Martinez had been driving for Swift Transportation for 6 years, running regular routes between Phoenix and El Paso. He'd memorized every mile of I-10 through Arizona and New Mexico, knew every truck stop, rest area, and good parking spot. In April 2020, during the early pandemic when highways were eerily empty, Greg made his regular Phoenix to El Paso run, leaving at 8 p.m. for an overnight drive. Around 2 a.m., somewhere between Lordsburg and Deming, New Mexico, Greg needed to stop for fuel and a bathroom break. He knew there were limited options in this stretch, mostly dark desert with occasional ranch exits. But his headlights picked up signs for a truck stop he'd never noticed before: Desert Rose Travel Plaza. Next exit, fuel, food parking. The exit ramp was well maintained, and the truck stop was impressively large, a full-service facility with multiple fuel islands, a restaurant, a convenience store, even a small motel. The parking lot was about half, full with other trucks, which was strange for this empty stretch of road. But Greg was too tired to question it. He pulled up to a fuel pump. The place felt off immediately. The lighting was too bright, almost harsh, washing out colors and creating stark shadows. The other trucks in the lot were all older models, 1980s and 90s era vehicles, many with company logos from trucking firms Greg recognized as long defunct. But the trucks looked operational, not abandoned, clean and well maintained. Greg pumped diesel and noticed the price on the pump, $1.23 per gallon. That was wrong by about $3. He assumed the display was broken and went inside to pay. The convenience store was stocked with products, but everything was slightly out of date. Soda brands that had been discontinued, snack packaging with logos from 20 years ago, magazines on the rack with dates from 2003, 1997, 1989, different eras all mixed together. The clerk at the register was an older woman with a friendly smile who greeted Greg cheerfully. "How much fuel did you take, hon?" Greg told her the pump number and amount. She typed into an old cash register, an actual mechanical register, not electronic, and said, "That'll be $48.50. The price matched the $1.23 per gallon rate on the pump. Greg paid with a credit card, but the woman said apologetically, "Oh honey, our credit machine is down. Cash only tonight." Greg handed over $50, and she gave him change. Bills and coins that looked and felt normal but had dates on them ranging from 1987 to 2002. Not a single coin or bill from the current decade. Unnerved, Greg asked where exactly he was. The woman looked confused. "Desert Rose Travel Plaza, mile marker 78, been here since 1985. Greg knew a 10 well. There was no truck stop at mile marker 78, and there never had been. He asked if there was a restroom, and the woman pointed to a hallway. The restroom was clean but outdated, fixtures from the 1980s, a pay phone on the wall, a condom machine with prices in quarters. Greg used the facilities quickly, increasingly desperate to leave. In the mirror, he noticed his reflection was slightly off, not wrong exactly, but like he was looking at himself through old film, colors slightly faded, edges slightly blurred. Back in the parking lot, Greg saw drivers standing near their trucks, talking in small groups. He approached two men near a Freightliner and asked what was going on. They looked at him strangely. One said, "Going on? Nothing. Just taking a break. You okay, buddy?" "You look confused." Greg asked what year it was. The men exchanged worried glances. "It's 1996. You need to sit down. Maybe call someone." Greg backed away, mumbling apologies. He checked his phone, no signal, and the date on his screen flickered between 2020 and other years, changing randomly 1989, 2003, 2011, back to 2020. He got in his truck and tried to leave, but found the exit from the parking lot hard to navigate. Every turn seemed to lead back to the fuel pumps or the motel section. Other drivers watched him with concern. Finally, an older man flagged him down, someone Greg vaguely recognized but couldn't place. "You're not from now," the man said. "You've got that look?" The confused look. "We all had it when we first got here." The man explained he'd been stopping at Desert Rose since 1988. He'd left home from Tulsa in May of that year, stopped here for fuel, and never made it to his destination. Time doesn't work right here. Or maybe time works too well, all at once, every year simultaneously. "I've been here 32 years, but I don't age. I don't need to eat, but I get hungry. I refuel my truck, but the gauge never changes." The man pointed to the other drivers. "That guy over there arrived in 2007. The woman in the Peterbilt got here in 1993. We're all stuck, all trying to leave, all failing. Some of us have seen new drivers arrive, confused like you. Most of them get out. A few don't. The trick is to not stay too long. Once you park and sleep here, you might not leave." Greg asked how to escape. The man pointed to the highway entrance ramp. "Drive toward the on-ramp. Don't look back, don't stop. Don't second-guess yourself. Gun it and don't lift off the accelerator until you're back on I-10. If you hesitate, you'll circle back to the parking lot. That's how it keeps us." Greg thanked him and got back in his truck. He drove toward the on-ramp, accelerating aggressively. In his mirrors, he saw the Desert Rose Travel Plaza behind him, impossibly large now, stretching across the horizon. The other drivers were standing in the parking lot, waving, some looking hopeful, others resigned. Greg pushed his truck to highway speed before even reaching the ramp. As he merged onto I-10, the truck stop vanished. He checked his mirrors, nothing but empty desert. His phone signal returned, showing 30:14 a.m., April 23, 2020. His GPS indicated he was near Deming, exactly where he should be. But his fuel gauge showed full, completely full, though he'd used nearly half a tank before stopping. The $50 he'd paid was gone from his wallet, replaced by $48.50 in old bills and coins. Greg finished his delivery to El Paso and immediately drove back to Phoenix. He filed no report, told no one, tried to convince himself it was hallucination brought on by fatigue. But on every subsequent drive through that stretch of I-10, he watches for the signs to Desert Rose Travel Plaza. He's never seen them again. But once, at 2 a.m. near mile marker 78, his CB radio picked up a transmission. "Hey driver, fuel stop ahead, decent coffee, fair prices." He recognized the voice, the older man who'd told him how to escape. Still there, still waiting, still trying to help new arrivals find their way out of a truck stop that exists in all years and no years. Still serving travelers who stopped for fuel decades ago and never left. Michael O'Brien was a second-generation Irish American trucker from Boston who'd spent 14 years driving for various companies before going independent in 2015. He purchased a used Volvo VNL with a spacious sleeper berth, which he'd customized with curtains, a small TV, and personal items that made it feel less like a vehicle and more like a mobile home. In June 2018, He picked up a load of electronics from a distribution center in Memphis, Tennessee, bound for retailers in the Northeast. The load itself was routine. Pallets of laptops, tablets, and other consumer electronics, properly secured and manifested. But the warehouse worker who'd helped load the cargo, a nervous young man named Devon, pulled Michael aside before he left. "Man, I don't want to freak you out, but someone died in that truck. The previous owner. Dispatch doesn't tell drivers because it's bad for business. But I thought you should know." Michael demanded details. Devon explained that the truck's original owner, an independent operator named Carl Hutchins, had died of a heart attack while sleeping in the berth during a delivery stop in Ohio in 2014. His body wasn't discovered for 3 days. The truck had been cleaned professionally, resold at auction, changed hands twice, and eventually ended up with Michael. The company records had been sanitized, no mention of the death, no disclosure to subsequent buyers. Michael was angry but pragmatic. People died in vehicles all the time. It didn't make the truck haunted or cursed. He drove out of Memphis around 6 p.m., planning to make it to Kentucky before resting. The first few hours were completely normal. Traffic, weather, CB chatter, nothing unusual. But around midnight, when he stopped at a rest area near Nashville to sleep, things changed. The sleeper berth felt wrong. Despite being alone, Michael had the persistent sensation of someone watching him. The air was colder in the berth than in the cab, even though the climate control was consistent. He tried to sleep, but found himself repeatedly jerking awake with the conviction that someone was in the sleeper with him. So strong he'd sit up, turn on the light and check. Nothing. Empty space, his belongings exactly where he'd left them. At 3 a.m., Michael felt weight on the edge of his bunk, as if someone had sat down. The mattress compressed visibly, creating an indentation. He could feel the shift in balance, could see the blanket being displaced. He grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the entire berth. Nothing visible, but the weight remained, pressing down on the mattress for 15 seconds before releasing. Michael got out of the sleeper and sat in the driver's seat until dawn, drinking coffee from his thermos, refusing to go back into the berth. He convinced himself it was psychological, the power of suggestion from Devon's warning, creating imaginary sensations. But when daylight came and he inspected the sleeper, he found something that hadn't been there before, a greasy handprint on the curtain, larger than his own hand, with distinct fingerprint ridges visible in the fabric's fibers. He took photographs and continued driving, too far into the delivery to turn back. That night, stopped at a truck stop in Pennsylvania. Michael spoke with other drivers about paranormal experiences on the road. One older driver, a woman named Shirley, told him about a friend who'd driven a truck where someone had died. "The dead one doesn't know he's dead," she explained. "He thinks it's still his truck. He's trying to complete his delivery, sleeping in his own berth like always. You're the intruder to him." That perspective terrified Michael more than the idea of a malicious ghost. He wasn't being haunted by something evil. He was being haunted by someone confused and persistent, someone who thought Michael was the one who didn't belong. That night, Michael tried sleeping in the berth again, too exhausted to remain in the driver's seat. At 2 a.m., he woke to find his blanket being pulled toward the foot of the bunk, steadily and firmly, as if someone was trying to remove it. Michael grabbed the blanket and pulled back, and for 10 seconds, he was engaged in a tug of war with an invisible opponent. He let go, and the blanket was yanked completely off the bunk, falling to the floor. Michael scrambled out of the sleeper, his heart hammering, and spent the rest of the night in a booth inside the truck stop restaurant, drinking coffee until sunrise. When he returned to his truck, He found the blanket folded neatly on the bunk, in a precise military-style fold he'd never used. Michael researched Carl Hutchins obsessively. He found an obituary. Carl had been 62 when he died, a veteran, a widower with 3 adult children. He'd been driving for 40 years, his entire adult life on the road. The obituary mentioned he was devoted to his work, often joking he'd die with his boots on in his truck, which is exactly what happened. Carl's last load, Michael discovered through trucking forums, had never been delivered. Carl had died halfway through the route, and the cargo was reassigned to another driver. Carl had never completed his final job. Michael made a decision that felt insane but necessary. He spoke aloud to the empty sleeper. "Carl, my name is Michael O'Brien. This is my truck now. I know it was yours. I know you died here. I'm sorry that happened. I'm sorry your last delivery wasn't completed, but you need to let go. Your family had your funeral. Your route got finished by someone else. You're done. You can rest now." Silence. No response, no phenomena, nothing. Michael felt foolish talking to air, but that night, stopped in Massachusetts near his final delivery destination, he slept in the berth without incident. No cold spots, no weight on the mattress, no blankets being pulled. The sleeper felt normal again, just a small space in a truck, nothing more. The next morning, Michael found one last item, a small notebook tucked between the mattress and the wall, in a spot he'd cleaned thoroughly when he first bought the truck. The notebook was Carl's log, personal notes about deliveries, rest stops, thoughts about retirement, plans for visiting his daughter in Oregon. The last entry, dated the day before Carl died, read: "Tired tonight. Should make Columbus by tomorrow afternoon. Getting too old for this. Might be time to hang it up after this run." Michael contacted Carl's family through information in the obituary and sent them the notebook. Carl's daughter called him, crying, thanking him for this final piece of her father. She said the family had always felt terrible that Carl died alone, that his last thoughts and words were unknown. The notebook provided closure. After that, the phenomena stopped completely. Michael drove the truck for 3 more years without a single unexplained incident. But he never forgot Carl Hutchins, and he kept a small photo of Carl, provided by the daughter, mounted on his dashboard. Sometimes, on long night drives, Michael would talk to the photo, mentioning where he was, what he was hauling, how the truck was running. Talking to Carl like a co-driver, a companion on the endless road. Michael sold the truck in 2021 when he retired. He told the new owner everything, about Carl, about the haunting, about the notebook. The new owner appreciated the honesty and said he'd keep Carl's photo on the dashboard. Some trucks carry more than cargo. They carry the memories of every driver who ever gripped their wheel, slept in their berth, spent thousands of hours in their cab. And sometimes those memories are strong enough to persist beyond death, strong enough to reach across the boundary between living and gone, still trying to complete one last delivery, still driving through the night, still unable to rest until the job is done. Puste. Angela Rivera had been driving for Landstar for 11 years, specializing in time-sensitive medical equipment deliveries across the Midwest and Great Plains. She was meticulous about schedules, always planning routes to the minute, always arriving exactly when promised. In December 2019, she picked up a load of laboratory equipment from a manufacturer in Iowa City, bound for a medical center in Omaha. The route was straightforward, Highway 80 West, about 3 hours under normal conditions. Angela left Iowa City at 5 p.m., expecting to arrive in Omaha by 8 p.m. for an 8:30 delivery appointment. But heavy snow began falling near Des Moines, slowing traffic and reducing visibility. By 7 p.m., Angela was behind schedule, stuck in crawling traffic on I-80, watching her delivery window evaporate. She took an exit near Atlantic, Iowa, planning to find an alternate route on state highways. The snow was relentless, accumulating faster than plows could clear it. Angela followed her GPS onto Highway 6, which should have been a decent alternate route, but conditions were worsening. Around 8:30 p.m., desperate for information about road conditions and seeing nothing but darkness and snow, she spotted lights ahead, a diner, sitting alone on the highway, illuminated like a beacon. The sign read, "Starlight Diner, open 24 hours," in vintage neon. The building was a classic 1950s style chrome diner, perfectly maintained, with several cars parked outside despite the terrible weather. Angela pulled into the lot, planning to get coffee, use the restroom, and ask locals about road conditions. Inside, the diner was warm and busy. About a dozen customers sat at tables and the counter, eating, talking, behaving normally. A waitress in a traditional pink uniform approached with a smile. "Sit anywhere, honey. Coffee." Angela took a booth near the window and accepted coffee gratefully. The menu was laminated, offering classic diner fare at prices that seemed absurdly low. Coffee for 50 cents, burgers for $3, a full breakfast for under $5. Angela ordered a burger and asked the waitress about road conditions. The waitress looked confused. "Roads? They're fine, dear. Little snow, but nothing serious." "Where are you headed?" Angela explained her route to Omaha. The waitress nodded. "Oh, you'll be fine. Highway's clear. Should take you about 2 hours." Something felt off, but Angela couldn't identify what. The diner seemed normal, clean, functional, appropriately staffed. But the other customers were all dressed strangely, in styles from decades ago. She noticed a man at the counter wearing a fedora and suit that looked like something from the 1940s. A couple in a booth wore poodle skirts and a Letterman jacket, like teenagers from the 1950s. A woman alone was reading a newspaper. Angela caught a glimpse of the headline, "Kennedy Assassination Shocks Nation." Angela's burger arrived, and it was delicious, perfectly cooked, fresh ingredients, exactly what a highway diner should serve. But when she looked at her phone to check the time, the screen was glitching. That's 8:47 p.m. December 15, 2019, then 9:23 p.m. March 3, 1967, then 6:15 p.m. October 18, 1955. The display cycled through different eras randomly. She approached the waitress and asked what year it was. The waitress laughed, not unkindly. "Honey, are you feeling okay? It's 1963, November 24th, day after Kennedy got shot. Terrible thing. Everyone's torn up about it." Angela looked around the diner again. Now that she was paying attention, everything was from 1963. The newspaper headlines, the television mounted on the wall showing Walter Cronkite, even the coins left on the counter as tips. Angela tried to leave, but when she looked out the window, her truck was gone. The parking lot contained only 1960s-era cars, Chevrolets, Fords, Plymouths, all in perfect condition. She ran to the door, but the waitress called out, "Your bill, dear. You need to pay before leaving." Panicking, Angela pulled out modern $20 bills. The waitress examined them with confusion. "What kind of money is this? These bills don't look right. The design is all wrong." Angela searched her pockets and found the old coins she'd received as change at the Desert Rose Travel Plaza months ago. Coins from the 1980s and 90s that she'd kept as souvenirs. She handed them to the waitress, hoping they'd work. The waitress accepted the coins. "Well, these are future coins, but I suppose money is money. Wait here." She went to the kitchen, and Angela heard muffled conversation. When the waitress returned, she was accompanied by an older man in a cook's uniform. "You're not from now, are you?" he said simply. The cook explained that the Starlight Diner existed in all times simultaneously. It appeared to travelers when they were lost, when they needed help, when time was flowing wrong. "You're from 2019, he said, not asking but stating. "We're in 1963 right now. but we've been in lots of years. The diner moves through time, always the same place but different when. Your truck is outside, but you can't see it because it's in 2019 and you're in 1963. He told Angela that to leave. She needed to finish her meal, pay her bill, and walk out the door thinking very clearly about her own time. Don't doubt yourself. Don't wonder if it'll work. Just know you're from 2019 and walk through the door into 2019. Uncertainty will trap you here. Angela sat back at her booth, finished her burger with hands that shook, and drank her coffee. She looked at the other customers and realized they might all be time travelers like her, people from different eras who'd stumbled into the starlight while lost, trying to find their way back to their own times. Or perhaps they were permanent residents, people who'd failed to return, now living in the diner's eternal present. She walked to the door, focused entirely on the date December 15, 2019. She thought about her truck, her delivery, the snow, the specific moment she'd left. She opened the door and stepped through. The cold hit her immediately. Her truck was directly in front of her, parked where she'd left it, covered in snow. The neon starlight sign behind her flickered once and went dark. Angela turned around. The diner was gone. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds, a crumbling foundation barely visible under the snow. A historical marker sign stood nearby site of Starlight Diner, 1952-1978. Angela checked her phone. 9:47 p.m. December 15, 2019. She'd been in the diner about an hour, but it felt both much longer and much shorter. She drove to Omaha through snow that seemed less heavy now, completing her delivery only 20 minutes late. The medical center accepted the equipment without complaint about the delay. But Angela kept the receipt from the Starlight Diner, a small paper slip printed with Starlight Diner, Highway 6, Atlantic, Iowa, total 4475, November 24, 1963. Thank you. The paper has aged naturally, yellowing and brittle, despite being less than an hour old when Angela received it. She keeps it in a plastic sleeve in her visor, a reminder that highways connect more than places. They connect times, eras, moments separated by decades, but accessible through doors that appear when travelers are lost and time is flexible. Angela has driven past that empty lot a dozen times since, always looking for the starlight, never seeing it. But once, at 2 a.m. during a snowstorm in February 2021, she saw neon lights ahead, that familiar glow. She slowed down, tempted, but kept driving. The Starlight Diner helps those who are lost, but Angela wasn't lost that night. She knew exactly where and when she belonged. Some doorways are best left for other travelers, other times, other people who need to find their way through the temporal maze of America's highways. Cargo Vincent Shaw was a 32-year-old driver for a small independent company in Louisiana, specializing in livestock transport, not animals, but equipment and supplies for ranches, farms, and agricultural operations. He'd spent 8 years hauling feed, veterinary supplies, fencing materials, the practical infrastructure of rural America. In February 2021, he received an unusual request from his dispatcher: transport what was described as veterinary research equipment from a facility outside Shreveport to a destination in Arkansas. The pickup location was a concrete building with minimal signage, surrounded by high fences and security cameras. Vincent backed up to the loading dock where 2 men in bio-hazard suits loaded his trailer with a single large container, a refrigerated unit about the size of a small room, mounted on wheels, sealed with heavy locks and warning labels about biological materials. They secured it carefully, gave Vincent paperwork with handling instructions, and sent him on his way without explaining what was inside. The drive started normally. The refrigerated container had its own power supply and climate system, humming quietly in the trailer. But about 30 miles from Shreveport, Vincent heard something over the sound of his engine and the road. A sound from inside the container. A high-pitched sound that rose and fell in pitch, almost like screaming. Vincent pulled over immediately and got out to investigate. The sound was definitely coming from the container, muffled by the thick walls but audible. It sounded organic, not mechanical, not wind or pressure release, but genuinely like something alive was inside making that noise. The container was locked with both physical locks and electronic seals that would alert the destination facility if tampered with. Vincent called his dispatcher, explained what he was hearing. The dispatcher called the shipping facility, then called Vincent back. They say it's normal. Equipment inside makes noise during temperature regulation. Ignore it and complete the delivery. That explanation didn't satisfy Vincent at all. The sound wasn't mechanical. It had variation emotion, the unmistakable quality of something in distress. He continued driving, but the screaming grew louder and more frequent. It came in bursts, 30 seconds of high-pitched shrieking, then silence, then another burst. Vincent turned his radio up, trying to drown it out, but the sound penetrated everything. Other drivers on his CB channel asked if he was all right. They could hear the noise bleeding through his transmission. Near the Arkansas border, Vincent stopped at a truck stop and tried to inspect the container more carefully. The paperwork described the contents as primate tissue samples for research, but tissue samples don't scream. Vincent looked for ventilation ports and found them, small mesh, covered holes on each side. He put his ear close to one and heard clearly breathing, not mechanical breathing, but organic, rapid, panicked breathing. And underneath that, softer sounds like whimpering. Vincent made a decision that could cost him his job and possibly result in legal action. He took photographs of the container, the locks, the labels, everything. He documented the sounds on video. Then he called law enforcement, requesting they inspect his cargo. 2 state troopers met him at the truck stop, skeptical at first, then increasingly concerned as they heard the sounds Vincent was describing. The troopers contacted federal authorities. This was potentially federal jurisdiction involving biological research and interstate transport. While waiting, Vincent noticed something disturbing. Blood was dripping from the bottom of the container. Not refrigerant, not condensation, but actual blood, fresh, red, pooling on the trailer floor. The temperature was supposed to be keeping whatever was inside preserved and stable. But clearly, something had gone wrong. Federal agents arrived within 2 hours, FBI and USDA officers, followed by a veterinary emergency response team. They forced open the container's seals, despite protests from the shipping facility via phone. What they found inside became a federal case that's still partially classified. But Vincent saw enough before being ushered away to know his instincts had been correct. Inside the container were primates, 6 rhesus monkeys in individual cages alive, not tissue samples. They'd been sedated, but the sedation was wearing off, leaving them conscious, terrified, and in medical distress. They'd been subjected to some kind of experimental procedures. Vincent saw surgical incisions, implanted devices, areas where fur had been removed and skin grafted. The screaming he'd heard was the monkeys vocalizing their pain and fear as they regained consciousness. The facility in Shreveport was shut down pending investigation. The destination facility in Arkansas denied knowledge of the transport method. They'd been expecting preserved tissue samples, not live animals undergoing active distress. The 2 men who'd loaded Vincent's truck were never identified. Security footage from the facility had been mysteriously corrupted. Vincent's company was cleared of wrongdoing, but the incident led to federal reforms in how biological research materials were transported. Vincent never learned the full truth about what experiments had been performed on those monkeys or why they were being transported in that condition. But he received letters from animal rights organizations thanking him for his intervention, and from the federal prosecutor handling the case explaining that his decision to call authorities likely saved the animals' lives and exposed an illegal research operation. But the screaming didn't stop. For months after the incident, Vincent heard it while driving, phantom sounds that seemed to come from his empty trailer, from the radio speakers, from inside his own head. He couldn't haul refrigerated cargo anymore. The sound of the cooling units would trigger immediate panic attacks. He switched to dry goods exclusively, then eventually left trucking entirely. Vincent now works at an animal sanctuary in East Texas, caring for rescued primates, including 2 of the 6 monkeys from his trailer, Luna and Marcus, who survived their ordeal and were retired to the sanctuary after medical recovery. They recognized Vincent when he first visited, approaching the edge of their enclosure and making soft vocalizations he swears are different from the sounds they make to others. Recognition, gratitude, maybe, or just acknowledgement that they'd been through something together. Vincent volunteers at the sanctuary 3 days a week now, making peace with what he heard on Highway 20 in February 2021. The screaming in his memory has faded, replaced by different sounds. Luna and Marcus playing in their habitat, chattering contentedly, living the rest of their lives in safety. Vincent knows most cursed cargo stories don't have resolutions like this. Most end ambiguously, mysteriously, without closure. But sometimes a driver gets to know that stopping, that listening to instinct despite pressure to ignore and deliver, makes a difference. Sometimes the cargo that screams gets heard, gets rescued, gets a second chance. And sometimes that's enough to make peace with all the deliveries that went wrong, all the highways that led nowhere, all the voices on the CB radio calling from times and places that don't exist, still looking for someone to hear them, still hoping someone will stop and listen and choose to help.